Chaos will continue until morale improves. My name's Eric. This is above my pay grade. Let's get into it. As you've probably heard me say, the economic collapse of currencies will probably, or more than likely, hit developing nations long before it hits the United States. And one of those developing nations, south of India, Sri Lanka, is dealing with that right now. Massive riots. The prime minister just resigned, and all of this is because of their currency collapsing, them not being able to service their debt. And I'm going to read from a story here that I'll link in the description. But think about what this article is saying and how similar it is to the United States. Now, the United States does have the world reserve currency, but I think chaos will continue around the world because all nations are dealing with servicing their debt and how hard that is. And a lot of people have said, or may think, why don't we just erase the debt or not pay it? And what you need to understand is when a government sells a bond, that is a guarantee to be repaid. Now, if they don't repay that bond, ask yourself who will ever buy a bond from them in the future. So their ability to take out further debt is eliminated. So that's why it's a very big deal for governments to default on their debt and why they definitely don't want to do that. So let's take a look at this story. It's from the Indian Express, and there's a ton of violence there. There's quite a bit of uproar. There's 10 people that were killed. But Sri Lanka is dealing with higher prices and inflation, just like everywhere else in the world. The problem is their margin of error was shrunk, and now they cannot service their bonds. So let's read here. How did Sri Lanka get here? Critics say that the roots of the crisis, the worst in several decades, lie in economic mismanagement by successive governments that created sustaining twin deficits, a budget shortfall alongside a current account deficit. So here's the part that I think is similar to the United States. Sri Lanka is a classic twin deficit economy, says 2019 Asian Development Bank working paper. Twin deficits signal that a country's national expenditures exceed its national income. That has happened every year in the United States, I believe, for the last decade. We are always running a deficit, meaning our tax receipts versus what our expenditures are, has constantly gone up. And by the way, keeping in mind, there's this massive debt of Social Security unfunded liabilities that it hasn't even been addressed. That's coming due. So the question is there some magic money fairy that's going to come out of the woodwork and save us from the problems that Sri Lanka is having? I don't think so. Twin deficits signal that a country's national expenditure exceeds its national income and that its production of tradable goods and services is inadequate. So this goes to the United States trade deficit. We don't produce a lot here in the United States, and part of that reason is we export dollars, and it's far cheaper for companies to produce things offshore. And the reason it's far cheaper is partly because we have the world reserve currency. It all goes back to the government. Okay, so basically Sri Lanka can't pay its debts. Now, who is Sri Lanka going to for help? The IMF, International Monetary Fund. You guys have probably heard me talk about this before. And I don't know why, but a lot of people assume goodwill of people in charge a lot of times. People that they don't even know, that are unelected. IMF is one of these groups that often uses economic crisis internationally to assert control over nations. So it says the IMF initiated discussions with Sri Lanka authorities as possible loan program in the coming days, as IMF spokesperson said on Thursday. And this article was published 2 days ago. So the problem, you should think about this critically with the IMF. IMF was majorly critical of El Salvador for adopting Bitcoin as a sovereign currency. Why do you think that is? Do you think they're just smart people that want to help El Salvador? Or do you think Bitcoin is outside their purview of control, and therefore they don't want other countries using it? That's what I lean towards. Because El Salvador last year adopted Bitcoin as a actual currency in their country. And they've been fairly successful from it. There will be growing pains, but IMF is not a fan. And that gives me pause. Same thing, it gives me pause when an authoritarian government like China outlaws Bitcoin. Because if Bitcoin can be shut down, do you think an authoritarian government like China wouldn't shut it down? I would imagine yes. Bitcoin can be stolen from its citizens. Do you think China wouldn't have done that? So Bitcoin is an example of a currency that is outside of counterparty risk, meaning there's nobody else that holds it on your behalf. You actually hold it and own it. And because of that, it cannot be controlled or manipulated, which, if you haven't gotten the clue bird yet, a lot of the problems we have today, including in Sri Lanka, have to do with whatever you want to call them, the elite, or people that are smarter than you in a room trying to control millions of other people by controlling the currency. It doesn't work. It really doesn't. And whether you believe their intentions are malicious or that they have good intentions, the problem is trying to control an economy by controlling the money or the price of money doesn't work, and it eventually distorts the economy. And then you get things like people taking out college debt and asking the government to pay it back for them. Equity. Keep that in mind. I think you're going to see more of this. Last thing I'll say, I think more nations are going to default. More nations are going to need help from the IMF. And then it'll graduate to larger nations like Europe. And I think the United States will be last. But again, we're in a currency crisis. So when you see these news stories of that seem to be something you would see once a year, and you're seeing them every day now, that's because the currencies around the world, they're not able to service their debt. So there's really only two options, default or print. And your guess is as good as mine on what they're going to do, but default is politically unpalatable. Printing is short-term politically more palatable. So that's my guess as to what they're going to do. And what does that mean? More inflation. So they're trying to get reelected by helping the people, but they don't want inflation. So they're trying to run or thread the needle, which is fairly impossible. And the one solution that will help them, which is let the free market solve it and get out of the way, they can't handle that one. So eventually we'll get there because of riots in the street. But that's the one they don't want to let happen, because there's a lot of growing pains with that and they don't have control of it. So, all right, guys, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you like this stuff, please like, share, subscribe with your friends and family, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.